This is the Motherlands podcast. The intention of this podcast is to provide evidence-based information related to fertility, pregnancy, childbirth, and postpartum, as well as share positive birth stories. I am your host, Keely Semler. This week's episode is extremely deep and informative. I'm really excited for you to hear it, as I feel like it's going to resonate with a lot of you. The interview you are about to hear is with a guest that I had been repeatedly hearing about from my clients over the past several years. Her ability to support new mothers in many different seasons of life is truly incredible. Molly Nourmand is a psychotherapist that specializes in perinatal mental health. She started an incredible company called Life After Birth, where she facilitates group sessions with new mothers as they process the complexities of becoming a parent, shifts in identity, changes related to intimacy, and so much more. We discuss what are some common ways that postpartum anxiety and mood disorders, also known as PMADs, present in early parenthood. Molly also shares a bit about her own birth story, which ultimately led her to creating her company, Life After Birth. I have been so thankful for the feedback on all the different guests of Motherlands. And if there are any specific topics that you are eager to learn more about, feel free to send me an email at hello@keelysemler.com. I'd love to hear from you. Also, just a friendly reminder that writing a review and a rating of Motherlands on Spotify or Apple Podcasts is truly a wonderful way to support this podcast. To be honest, for me, paid sponsorships just does not feel in alignment right now, so I really do rely on the ratings and the reviews. As always, thank you so much for listening. I'm here in the lovely home of Molly Nourmand. Thank you so much for being willing to chat today, and I've been really excited to talk to you because the feedback I've gotten from some of my clients about the groups that you host and have for new mothers, I think is just incredible work. And I kind of want to jump right in and talk about a buzz phrase that keeps coming up with clients, and I think it's really popular in the parenting community. And that phrase is mental load. What does that mean?
Yeah, so mental load, or sometimes it's called invisible load or invisible labor. It's all the little things that are often taken for granted for running a home. And I think the metaphor I think of is on your computer, if you have a ton of tabs open, you're just thinking, okay, I have to order some more laundry detergent. I have to make the doctor's appointment for my daughter. I have to finish that email. I have to start my tax prep. I have to declutter the coat closet. It's just all of those things that accumulate. And if we go back to the computer analogy, it can be taxing on a computer if it has too many tabs open. It might just shut down, right? Unexpectedly quit. It's something that can weigh on us as women and as mothers. And the reason sometimes the word invisible is thrown into like the invisible load is because a lot of it's done behind the scenes. So it can often be taken for granted by other parties in the household. Toilet paper is always replaced on the toilet paper roll, and the fridge is always stocked, and the laundry is always put away. And a lot of it has to do with domestic stuff, as you're kind of hearing me riff. Have you ever heard of the book Fair Play by Eve Rodsky?
Yes.
So I feel like if she didn't coin that term, she definitely stamped it in our collective psyches. For those of you who are listening, if you're not familiar with it, she created this whole system and book, and it's called Fair Play, and it's about creating domestic balance between partners. And she uses the term she-fault instead of default, that a lot of things just fall onto the woman. So she is a problem solver and just created this fabulous book, not only illuminating the problem, but saying, okay, this is a way that we can help fix it and help create less resentment for the woman, usually, and we're talking about a heterosexual relationship here, man and woman. So yeah, she really revolutionized how we can unburden women from carrying all of the mental load, because historically women didn't work, and we've come a long way as women, and through different waves of feminism. So now, women more or less work equally as men and get more or less the same opportunities, more or less the same pay. And yet a lot of this mental load and a lot of the household chores and child rearing still disproportionately falls on the woman. So that's a little bit about Eve and her work. I'm a big fan.
Well, and I'm sure people listening can definitely relate to this.
Yes.
So my question for you, just going off of this idea of mental load, how do you think parents-to-be could communicate with each other before their child arrives? Like, what are some ways to prepare, even though nothing can truly prepare you for that transition? I mean, sure, there are things to help, education and all that. But as a therapist, what are possibly some conversations people can have with their partners to kind of share that mental load?
Great question. So I actually have a client, she's 37 weeks, and we just talked this past week, and I was really happy to hear that she had talked to her partner about kind of expectations, roles, duties after the baby comes. And like you said, just like a birth plan, a parenting plan isn't going to be perfect. It's not going to go according to quote unquote plan, but it's a nice,
preferences.
Yes. Parenting preferences. Let's change it. So, as a doula, it's just good to have a little bit of a roadmap talking about it. Oh, I didn't know I was going to be asked this in birth. I didn't know this was going to happen when I had the baby. Just kind of bringing it to the surface and having a conversation, having different knowledge before you're actually in it, whether it's your birth or, parenting. So to answer your question, this client, I encouraged her to have this conversation. And so I was really happy to hear she had it. And they kind of worked it out. They're the kind of couple that I don't think they needed to do a couples therapy session. Some couples might, if the husband maybe, let's say, has more traditional modeling of man and female roles. But this couple, they seem pretty modern. They're like really young millennials, and they're like, we were able to have this conversation and kind of work out, okay, who's going to do this? What about the night feedings? How much maternity leave are you taking? How much paternity leave are you taking? Just kind of talking about it. So I think just having conversations about it can really help. And if you find yourself at an impasse, then it could be helpful to see a couples therapist just to kind of create that parenting preferences together.
Yeah, that's super helpful, I think, for people to hear. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about is just speaking to the fact that as a doula, I really witness, new mothers feeling very isolated and alone after they have a baby. And maybe they have friends, maybe they have relatives that, have given birth. But I think because our culture is so fragmented, people do feel very isolated and alone when they do decide to have kids. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about how a new mother in particular, how she can learn to ask for help before it's dire. And what are some signs that you see from your clients that indicate, let's talk about ways to kind of voice that you need help or support and how to really articulate that so that you get that support. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Kind of similar to what I was saying about how to offset some of the mental load is, having that conversation with your partner while pregnant. And I think to answer this question, I think doing as much as you can while pregnant can help, because what I find in my work is moms reaching out postpartum kind of as an SOS, like I'm drowning, I'm really depressed, I'm really anxious, I'm really overwhelmed, having all these intrusive thoughts, blah, 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 and I'm happy to help them and do triage and provide support and containment and resources and everything. However, I know there's a lot of pregnancy admin, but if pregnant folks can start to think about support and mental health support after birth while they're still pregnant can help out a lot.
I totally agree with you there.
And also half of perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, abbreviated as PMADs, in case I talk about it again, 50% of those mood and anxiety disorders are developed during pregnancy. So it's also helpful to kind of just offset some of that in pregnancy and then have someone that you already have a rapport with and you trust to kind of carry you through that maiden to mother transition. Someone like myself who specializes in pregnancy and postpartum. So I think encouraging them to reach out while they're pregnant is helpful, especially if they have certain risk factors that might contribute to them getting a PMAD. So I'll just share some risk factors with the listeners so that they're aware. History of your own depression and anxiety, family history of depression and anxiety, sensitivity to hormonal shifts such as PMS, sensitivity to birth control pills, challenges with fertility, miscarriages. Yes, so there's more stuff like birth and after, but I'm just kind of sticking to pregnancy and before. Or you're having life stressors, maybe a loss of someone in your family, or just like a move or a job thing, like just extra stressors that can contribute to developing a PMAD. I think it's wise to connect with a therapist ahead of time to have that person, almost like similar to a doula. You have that person ushering you during your pregnancy through the birth for physically, spiritually, all the things. It's like, it's nice to have a mental health practitioner along the way too.
Absolutely. And there is a really strong correlation between doula work and therapy work.
Yeah.
But I have to remind myself and sometimes have boundaries that I'm not a therapist, And so to be able to refer my clients to someone like you that has incredible knowledge and experience that can really hold my clients in the way that they need to be held through some of these really challenging moments or experiences. So I think what's interesting about what you do too is so much emphasis is placed on the physical when you're having a baby. I'm growing this human, my body's changing, gotta get different clothes. I gotta eat all these nutrients that are essential for my baby. And I've got to put together a nursery and I've got to get all of the physical in place. But there's so much emotional prep work too that can be done. And then I think postpartum can hit someone like a ton of bricks if they hadn't considered that emotional prep work too. So just speaking to what you're saying. And I think, postpartum's a whole other topic, which I'd love to get into with you. But I wonder if sometimes postpartum mood disorders can develop because that emotional prep work wasn't really considered beforehand. And then postpartum hits you and it's just like chaos.
Definitely. Or you just kind of maybe have a projection or a fantasy of what new motherhood's going to be like.
Hello, social media.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't know if you tell your clients, get off social media, but that's my number one thing. I'm like, I know there are beautiful photos out there of what birth looks like or could look like, but yours is not depicted in those.
Yeah.
It's so hard. And also Google.
Yeah.
Dr. Google.
Yeah, definitely. I'm right there with you, Keely. I encourage my clients to limit their social media intake and limit their what they're Googling, because it just continues that anxiety loop and that not good enoughness loop.
Yeah, totally. How can someone support a new mother? I know this is a little off topic. We're really focused on new mothers, but what are some ways our culture, people can support someone they love that just had a baby?
Great question. And I don't really think most people know. My husband and I, after we got married, we were like, oh my gosh, we wish we would have known how it is to get married, because now we know how to show up for our friends who are getting married. And then after we had a baby, we were like, oh my gosh, I wish we would have known we could have showed up for our friends a different way. It's like sometimes unless you go through it, you don't really know how to show up for someone unless you have training like a doula or a midwife and you have, you understand. But I think generally how you can support a new parent is, if you're going into their home post-birth, try not to think of yourself as a guest and don't let yourself be a guest.
Oh, I love that.
Instead, think, how can I serve this person? How can I support the mother? Because as you know, in pregnancy, there's such a reverence for the pregnant goddess and the pregnant body. And then as soon as the mom has the baby, the mother's completely discarded. Yes. A lot of the work that I do with my company, Life After Birth, is to focus more on the mother, because the baby's going to get fed and held and bathed and loved and everything. The baby can't exist without, the primary caretaker. So it's like the mom, we really have to take care of her. So, if you're going to visit a friend who's a new mom, beforehand, just kind of say, something like, I want to bring food, any allergies, any preferences, that kind of thing. Not like, can I bring something? Like, I'm going to bring something, or I'm going to send food. What night is better for you? Or are you craving anything, or you want us to surprise you? So I think taking charge a little bit instead of asking, because like you said earlier, I don't know if I fully answered it, but it's hard sometimes to ask for help or ask for support. And so if you can kind of take charge as the friend or family member or partner and say, I'm doing this for you, or like when you come over, instead of just focusing on the baby, of course you want to see the baby, they're cute, they're fresh, they're adorable.
But don't ask to hold the baby.
Yes, exactly.
She doesn't need that.
Yeah.
She needs you to drop food off.
Yeah.
Tell her she's doing great. And, do you want me to walk your dog?
Yeah.
I see that your recycle bin is full. Should I take it out for you?
Yeah.
I'm going to leave here in 10 minutes because I know you're really busy. I know you've got a tight turnaround schedule with feeding. So I don't want to eat up too much of your time today.
Yeah.
But I'm going to check in on you later tonight and see if I can come back tomorrow and drop some food off on your front step.
Exactly. And don't let them doula you. Don't let them be like, oh, do you want any water? Do you want any tea? Go over to the house fully fed and hydrated and caffeinated and just be there to be of service. They've just given birth. They're recovering. They're learning a new skill. They're trying to take care of a baby. They're probably sleep deprived. They're emotional. Their hormones are all over the place. Those are just some, I could talk a lot longer about this, but just being more like proactive and more kind of taking charge. Like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to unload your dishwasher. I'm going to, X, Y, or Z. So
I totally agree. And I also think it's twofold because the mom has to feel comfortable and secure enough to accept the help.
Yes.
Oh, I want to come drop food off for you. What, I'm going to make this as, oh, you don't have to, or I'm okay, or really? Mm-hmm. Like, I think that a lot of new moms have a hard time accepting help. Like, there's some sort of unspoken internal conversation, like, it's gotta look like I've got it all figured out. Mm-hmm. And it's a really good opportunity to just say, I don't need to have it all figured out, and I'm going to let other people take care of me for once.
Yeah, for sure. And I didn't know as a new mom, and this was over 7 years ago before I started working in this field, but I didn't realize that the mom needed just as much care as the newborn. I had no idea.
Yeah.
No clue. No one prepared me for that,
I always like to tell clients that I'm not worried about the baby, as you said.
Yes.
That baby's going to be already so loved and cared for. I'm really here to make sure the mom is feeling good and the partner is feeling good. And that baby's going to get lots of attention, but my attention remains on the mom and the partner so that they feel like they can be a well-oiled machine, which when you first have a baby, I don't think anything is well-oiled. You're just figuring it out.
Yeah.
Like the first couple weeks is such a battleground. But eventually there becomes some sort of rhythm and some sort of predictability in things. So I think it does get easier. But can you talk a little bit about partners? There is, rightly so much emphasis placed on the birthing person, on the mom. But the partner's having such a complex experience too in this. And their experiences is sort of viewed as like not as important or not as valuable, and they're holding a lot and they witness a lot.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm sure you see that as a doula too, just like, if the birth is traumatic, they're experiencing vicarious trauma. If something happens to the birthing person and or the baby, like they're holding a lot. It's like the two people they love most. And there's also, if we're talking about male partners, like heterosexual partners, like they can get depression too and anxiety too. And that's something that's not often talked about, that they can sometimes develop a PMAD and the birthing person doesn't. So that's just an interesting, point too. You probably know this in your training as a birth worker, but men weren't historically part of birth. Just more in recent history, men started attending births. So I think it is a lot for them to hold. Modern men are getting exposed to things that their ancestors weren't. And I don't think many men are processing their birth. I mean, probably not enough women are either, processing their birth. But you give me an idea of that would be so cool to process the birth with a partner.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, because that's what a lot of I do with my clients after they give birth.
Yeah.
And it's really funny because sometimes I'll snap a couple photos during birth. I'm not like a birth photographer, but I might like just casually when no one's looking, take a few photos. And the mom usually, or the birthing person usually has like this curiosity because they were so in it. They had no idea what was going on. But sometimes the partners are like, oh yeah, I don't need to look at those.
Interesting.
It's like a trigger for them in a weird way.
Yeah. I think a lot of men probably have unprocessed trauma from vicariously witnessing, their partners.
And then they don't even feel like they should process it because so much is overshadowed by that, the baby, mom healing, and those are very valid things, but so is his experience or her experience.
Exactly. And I think the same is true for fertility journeys. I have lots of friends and clients who are having or have had fertility journeys. And it's like, if you're the one having a miscarriage or a lost pregnancy, you're experiencing it viscerally and hormonally, and the partner's having their own grief. And also, I think things are getting better, but it's still, culturally men aren't supposed to cry and are supposed to be the strong ones, but they experience a lot of a really emotional stuff on this journey through reproduction, birth, and thereafter. And they're seeing their wife in a very primal, vulnerable, kind of unprecedented state when they're birthing, and then seeing them after. My cousin's husband's really funny. I remember when he had his first kid, he was like, I'm going to write a book called The Shit No One Tells You.
I love it. Did he write it yet?
No, because he would change his wife's diaper. And he was like, I didn't know I was going to have to do that, And so it's I do feel for these male partners that are getting pulled into this and then like fish out of water,
I think one thing that I work on is I do a lot of prep work with clients before they give birth. And I do a whole session on labor support, comfort techniques that's very involved with partner. And I always look at the partner and I say, she doesn't need you to do anything. She doesn't need you to make it easier or better because you can't. And she doesn't expect that from you. What she really wants is for you to acknowledge the hard work she's accomplishing through labor and birth. And by you sitting there present, witnessing her, not on your phone, not looking elsewhere, but really, truly, physically, emotionally present and witnessing her, that's what helps her get through labor. When I find that a client is able to connect with me on that level, they're unburdened. I love that word you used, unburdened earlier, because on the back end in postpartum, I feel like the partner, if they went through the experience going, I can't fix this, I can't make this better, I can't make this faster or easier on her, I'm just going to love on her and be present with her, then I think that postpartum, there's not as much of a shock to the system of oh, the birth was just so long and I did everything I could and it just wasn't good enough and, all that stuff.
I imagine that's challenging for a lot of men because energetically, masculine energy is doing,
Right.
What can I do to fix it? Action.
I would say women too. I mean, in labor, a lot of women are, what can I do to make this faster and more? And am I doing it right? And and I'm constantly trying to get mom in her body.
Yeah. But we live in such a patriarchal structure still that women, we've had to adapt and be more masculine. So that's why I think birth is such a rude awakening for most women that aren't kind of dwelling in that feminine energy, which I don't think many women are.
Right. I mean, again, our culture isn't really set up that way. So
no.
What about sex relating to your partner, since we're talking about partners?
Yeah.
So you go through this physically, emotionally, energetically, everything taxing experience. Then what? How do you connect to your partner? Because I would say, oh my God, 9 times out of 10, I'm talking about to clients sometimes 6 months later, and they're like, oh, I can't even think about being intimate, and they feel so alone, and they feel bad for their partner.
Yes.
And the partner also feels bad, but the partner has needs too.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts around that?
I have a lot of thoughts on it, and I would say it's definitely a hot topic with my clients, and it's kind of ubiquitous, like the sex after birth. I rarely hear like, oh my God, it's great, and we're just back in the sack, like nothing happened and everything's wonderful. You know, like I don't think I've ever really heard that, right?
I've heard that a couple times, and I'm always like, whoa,
yeah,
that's amazing.
For sure.
Great.
Yes.
I've had like recently one client was like, the sex is better.
Wow.
And I'm like, wow,
yeah,
that is so special.
No, that's wonderful. A lot of thoughts come up. When you were talking, I was thinking about the Madonna whore complex and how this doesn't happen all the time, but sometimes after birth, it's like it can be hard for the male partner to kind of like integrate their wife, you know, like to see them as the mother of their child and a sexual object. It can be like easier for them to compartmentalize and harder for them to, you know, want to engage in sex. There's also males that are, you know, desperately trying to reconnect sexually with their partner. And like you said earlier, the female partner's really trying hard to accommodate them, but she's just not feeling it, you know? So like that can be really challenging. So I think what can help is educating the male partner, ideally again ahead of time in pregnancy, so they kind of to manage their expectations. But just that, and not for all birthing people, but I would say for maybe the majority, it's going to take a little while after they give birth to kind of come back to themselves. I know probably the number one topic in my sessions and my groups are around identity.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Branches of our identity are like your relationship to your body and your sexuality and your career. Like there's just so much wrapped up in identity. So I think the first year after birth, it's so acute. You're recovering from your birth. If you're breastfeeding, that's a whole other barrier to intimacy with your partner. Sometimes it can be. You know, there's the getting touched out. You know, you've probably heard that term, like how...
well, also just going back, I don't mean to cut you off, but the breastfeeding thing, like that's a big one because those were for me as the man. Those were my boobs. Yes. And now you're giving them to this child, and now that's creating another barrier between us. Like, I've heard men talk about pregnancy and birth, and I've heard them talk to each other. And that's pretty eye-opening to me, hearing them talk amongst themselves about it, because to them, birth is sort of like a death of intimacy, a death of connection to the whore that they're used to, just going off of your analogy of the Madonna whore analogy. Yeah. And it's frustrating as someone that supports new families, because I think this conversation needs to start before people get pregnant, I think. And something needs to shift within our culture around the family unit, around intimacy. And perhaps we could talk about how there are different phases of intimacy within a relationship. It's not always going to be this like, oh, we're young teens and we have sex every night and it's hot and heavy. And it's that's one note of about a billion different notes that intimacy can look or feel like.
Definitely. And I think for couples who are postpartum or new parents, you know, it is important to just know that we have to kind of expand the definition of intimacy. Like it's not just intercourse. And in the beginning, it may just be like foot rubs or like snuggling on the couch or like, you know, taking a bath together or like something.
Maybe a quick hand job.
Exactly.
I don't know.
That too. Yeah. It's just going to look a little different, you know, than pre-kids.
For a while. And then things change. I think that sometimes when I talk to clients that are in the postpartum period, when you're in such the thick of it and you can't see the end in sight, you know, and feedings are every 2-3 hours and your body is exhausted, you kind of don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And so sometimes talking to someone or being a part of one of your groups where someone just a little further along can be like, things change. Yeah. Things do change. It doesn't stay like this.
Definitely.
You know?
Yeah. Just to hold the hope for each other. Because when you're in a certain phase with a baby or you're having a mental health state that's unpleasant, or a hormonal state that's unpleasant. When you're in it, it feels like it's never going to end, but so it's good to remember that things are temporary. Also, one thing I wanted to say, I think once you get pregnant and give birth and become a mother and have this whole new identity, you also need to reconnect to yourself sexually, which is kind of low on the totem pole if you're just like trying to, keep a tiny human alive.
Well, and sometimes that's the first time women actually connect with themselves sexually. So when we talk about pleasure, that's a whole other topic.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
It's like, wait a minute, what actually feels good to me?
Yes. Your body does change. So you're a different person. So things might feel different, sexually after you have a baby. And like we talked about with breasts, if they're used for feeding your baby, it can be hard to shape shift and be like, I'm feeding my baby. Oh, now I'm like getting pleasure from my partner and giving my partner pleasure. Like it can be hard to just, switch back and forth.
Yeah, especially if there's like a baby laying next to you or in the other rooms,
for sure,
sleeping. And that's a whole other thing.
Definitely. I think it is helpful to just normalize there will be perhaps a winter in your sex life. Not always. Again, there's exceptions to the rule that some people get back to it or find the partner that much more attractive or their sex is better than ever. That's aspirational, amazing. But for maybe the majority, it's okay if your sex life looks different, than it did pre-baby. And there's always the option for like it evolving into something new and different, And I think if you're with a partner for many, many years, your relationship does have to evolve and change. And so does your sex life too.
I love what you said, the winter of your sex life. I like that. I like bringing seasons into these life transitions because they really are different seasons.
Yep.
You mentioned identity shifting after birth. What are kind of the themes that come up with your clients and your groups? What are they processing in terms of identity? I think this is a really, really big thing that a lot of women, American women in particular, but I think globally, but particularly in America, because our identity is so intertwined with what we do.
Yes. Great question, Keely. Other than sleep, one of the main topics we talk about is the going back to work. That's just always a hot topic. And like we mentioned earlier about living in a patriarchal society and in America, a very capitalistic society, having a baby and living in a capitalistic society is a tricky one.
Oh, yeah, because we don't value families.
And our country still doesn't have like paid leave for any paid leave standards. Some companies do, thankfully, but there isn't just like a national standard for X amount of weeks off or months off. So it's really tricky. I mean, I think there's just a lot of discussion around, oh my gosh, like I have to go back to work. Like, I don't know how I'm going to do this, or like, can I extend it unpaid? Or like, I don't even know if I want to go back to this job, or like, there's just so much ambivalence and so much stress around it. If you are breastfeeding, trying to figure out, am I going to keep breastfeeding through this? If some don't have the luxury of working from home and they have to go to an office, I just see a lot of stress, and it makes me so upset because, as we know, other countries have like amazing maternity leave, a lot lengthier,
and paternity leave.
And paternity, yes. In my experience personally and professionally, I feel like a year is like minimal,
Yeah.
The first year is so acute. Granted, some women really want to go back to work, or, they have their own company, or they want to kind of reconnect to their pre-baby identity quicker, or they just feel really alive by their work. So this isn't for everyone, but for a lot, I think it's like, it would be amazing if you had that first year off just to like recalibrate,
Maybe women would rejoin the workforce with a little bit more zest and energy than being forced back in. And what about the financial burden, again, that's always placed on the birthing person, because there is no paid family leave.
Yep.
And it's a lot to just go down to a single income for a lot of families. And unfortunately, I have a lot of big feelings about this topic because I feel like starting a family is now a luxury. It's for the elite because only the elite can afford to take time off or to pay for childcare.
Totally.
Or to put their kids in the good schools. And I mean, especially Los Angeles, it's it's sickening, really. So how do you help these new moms feel supported and okay, even though they're not sure what they need to do yet? Like, how do you help them feel okay in wherever they are in their process?
Yeah. The kind of the culture of the groups is there's a lot of just like women supporting women, moms supporting moms kind of energy, which I love. So it's like if a mom is sharing about her dilemma, her personal intricacies of her personal dilemma of like going back to work, I'm the facilitator, but it is like a collective of moms. So it's like we're all just holding space for her to like share. We're not there to offer solutions and like masculine, like you should do this, you should do that. You know, sometimes we'll offer a few things, but we're kind of just holding a big container for her to like sort it all out, get it all out. And then maybe she feels a little more clarity about what to do, you know, and kind of to have that community support to kind of soundboard, you know.
Well, and even just going back again to like hearing someone else who may have been in that position just even a few months ago go, I was there.
Yeah.
I was there. I'm right there with you now. Yeah. But things do change and you will figure out what works for your family.
Yeah, exactly. To have that sisterhood. And I think with the groups that we hold at Life After Birth, they're a little different than a traditional Mommy and Me. I think traditional mom groups, they usually have moms who give birth right around the same time, which is kind of cool because then you meet people that have babies right around when you do. So it has its own magic to it. And the way we run our groups is it's kind of like anyone with that in that first year and change of motherhoods. And sometimes they're second time moms too. So it's like you may have someone who has a 3-month-old and someone with like a 9-month-old who's a second time mom. And so it's like, it really does feel like, you know, I know that term gets overused a lot, but like a village, you know, it's really like having like an older sister or an aunt or a mother or a grandma, like just to offer some collective wisdom. So you're not just like deer in headlights with other new moms, you know, Googling things in the middle of the night together.
Right. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, and I laugh because I was that mom, you know.
Were you that mom?
I was like, you know, anxious and...
It's anxiety inducing. You're just trying to keep this new human alive. You don't know if you're doing a good job. It's not like they can look up at you and say, you're doing a great job, Mommy. I'm so grateful that you're doing... I wish. Yeah. You know, so you're constantly second guessing yourself. And so it must be so amazing to have other moms be like, damn, you're doing a great job.
Yeah.
Holy cow. Amazing. I see you.
Yeah.
You know?
For sure.
It's amazing. We talked about PMADs earlier, and I kind of want to ask you another question about that again.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on placenta encapsulation? So I know there's not a ton of research, unfortunately, out there on consuming human placentas, but there is certainly anecdotal evidence to support that.
Yeah.
Have you encountered any of your clients consuming their placenta saying that it has kind of helped with any PMADs?
I don't have any anecdotal stories from clients. I just know for myself, kind of my own experience. So I did have my placenta encapsulated and I did the frozen chunks too. I did like the hardcore.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you put it in smoothies or something?
Yeah. Yes. To me, when I heard most or all mammals consume their placenta after birth, I was like, oh, I bet humans used to, but then there was a moment in history where people were like, oh, that's weird. We're not going to do that anymore. But there's probably value in it. So I was all for it. I did it. I unfortunately did go on to develop postpartum depression and anxiety. I can't say that it like worked for me, but maybe it put it at bay for a little bit. But I think for my case, I had the confluence of too many different factors. Maybe for some that aren't as high risk, it could be helpful. I feel like it couldn't hurt, you know?
Yeah, it couldn't hurt. But there's a couple of my clients that had anxiety and mood disorders prior to becoming pregnant. And, you know, I do say that I have seen anecdotally, and I know the midwives that I work with have seen it be somewhat of a protective factor, but not necessarily going to eliminate all postpartum mood disorders. And obviously this is a loaded topic, so we don't have to go too deep in this. But do you think sometimes postpartum mood disorders can be situational? Like partner goes back to work, everything's burdened on her. She's got to figure everything out.
Yes.
It might not always be chemical, although chemical is for sure happens.
100%, yes.
But it's sort of all lumped into one thing, which is postpartum mood and anxiety disorders. But there's a lot there.
Yes, definitely. It's hard to sometimes tease out where it's coming from. But if you have a genetic predisposition to mood disorders and anxiety, and you have risk factors, like you said, husband goes back to work a week after birth, that's the perfect storm. You know, that like the kind of genetics and environment, you know. But yes, I do think definitely situational things can certainly factor into someone getting depressed or anxious.
Can you just talk a little bit about some signs you see developing? Because I think that could be really helpful.
So what I will say is 2 weeks after birth, it's very normal to get what is sometimes thrown around as the baby blues, which to me seems really normal. Like you just birthed a baby, you're adjusting, you're healing. So you might be extra emotional, moody, anxious, like things you just feel all over the place. Like that's very normal. It should resolve on its own after 2 weeks or within 2 weeks. If it doesn't, if it carries on and or gets worse, that's when it could be PMAD, or if you develop symptoms after the first 2 weeks. Not everyone experiences the baby blues. I think about up to 80% of birthing people do. So maybe you feel fine those first 2 weeks, but then week 3 or 4, it sets in. So I would say some things to look out for as a birthing person, as birth workers, as partners, friends. I would say if they really start to not be able to function, that can be a risk factor. So for example, I'll use an anxiety disorder like OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. Most new parents have intrusive thoughts. Like they worry, oh my gosh, what if I just dropped the baby? Oh my God, what if my baby just fell out of bed? Like your brain just kind of worries. And it's actually across the board, most new parents have those kind of anxious, intrusive thoughts. If those thoughts are just on constant loop and you're having to do things to like compensate those obsessive thoughts and it's just very time consuming and you're not able to function.
Like you can't get out of bed and you're not feeding your baby and you're not eating and you're not using the bathroom or taking a shower. Like you're just like, you can't move because you have all these thoughts racing.
For sure. I'm using OCD as an example, which is a more like an extreme example, but like if someone has to do a certain hand washing ritual as part of their like compensation for their obsessive thought about, let's say it's about contamination and their baby's crying, but they have to finish their hand washing ritual. Like there's like certain things that it's a red flag, like, oh, something's up, you know, versus just kind of like normal new mom anxiety or like occasional intrusive thoughts. If the birthing person is feeling suicidal, you know, that's obviously like, you know, a red flag as opposed to just kind of feeling weepy or overwhelmed, you know. I would say insomnia can be a indicator. So obviously your sleep gets very disrupted when you have a new baby and especially if you're feeding. But if like the baby's sleeping and you're still not able to sleep and you just have really bad insomnia, like that's a little bit of a red flag. You know, that's usually pointing to like maybe an anxiety disorder or something, or maybe there's some trauma from the birth.
And this is more like week 2 though, because I think right after the birth, they might not be sleeping right away just because they're like,
exactly,
you know, shocked and there's all these emotions and you're trying your best to get to know your baby. And so you're not quite knowing when you should sleep and if you should, you know.
Totally. But like after the first 2 weeks, like just kind of keep a lookout for some of those things. Or like we all kind of like to check the monitor if the baby's like not right next to us. We get kind of hooked on that as new moms. But if someone's like not sleeping at all, they're just like, you know, glued to their phone, obsessively looking at the monitor, like, and they're not sleeping, that's just a red flag.
What do you think about all the technology involved in like new parenthood, child rearing and all that?
Yeah, great question. Some of it's incredible and probably life-saving. You know, I don't know all the statistics. Some of it's probably part of living in a capitalistic society. Like the birth industry is probably like, I don't know all the statistics, but a very lucrative industry. Like how much more shit can we sell to new parents that
Seriously.
they're going to, and kind of play to their anxiety. And so some of it's a racket, but some of it could be really helpful. You know, I don't know what's like the monitor in fashion right now, but like my daughter was born in 2016. I had the Nest Cam, so I could have the monitor that's watching her in her crib on my phone. So if I would go to dinner and have a babysitter, I could watch it, which is kind of cool. You know, you can kind of, but then I would have to tell myself, Molly,
You don't need to be staring at her at dinner.
Exactly. Yeah. Like be present. Enjoy your damn dinner. You know, like you have a responsible caretaker. Like you kind of, I have to like do a little self-talk to
and like a little level of trust too,
Yes.
that things are okay. But it's hard because if the technology's there, why not?
Yes. Yes, for sure. It takes a lot of self-constraint to just check it sparingly and not be like glued to it. Because then you might as well not even go out, you know?
Right. I had sent you a couple of topics that I wanted to discuss with you in this interview. And one of them was if you're open to sharing your birth experience. And you replied, I'm happy to share, but, it wasn't totally a positive experience. And then that kind of gave me pause because when I say positive experience, I'm not saying it like everything happened exactly the way that you wanted it to, but more positive in that in the long run, you had a healthy baby, you reconfigured things in your life that feel more supportive and aligned to who you are. Mm-hmm. But in the moment, maybe things didn't go according to plan.
Mm-hmm. So basically, it's interesting that we're doing this interview in this house because I labored here.
Wow.
So when someone says, oh, did you have a home birth or a hospital birth? I'm like, well, I labored at home, but I birthed at the hospital. So I kind of did a hybrid. Mm-hmm. I know when we first got pregnant, my husband and I, we were entertaining a home birth. And the care that I received from a home birth midwife was unparalleled. So basically we started with her and loved her, loved the care. And then my husband and I, we got to the point where we were like, neither one of us felt 100% gung-ho about a home birth. And I think you both have to be confident with the decision,
Yes.
And neither one of us were like a full body yes. So we said, okay, can we do kind of a hybrid? So I looked into, at the time, UCLA Westwood had a midwife program there. Mm-hmm. They've since left and they're just at Santa Monica. Thank you. I was like, we live 15 minutes from Westwood. So I was like, let's do that. I decided to switch my care to the birth team at UCLA Westwood. They're hospital midwives though. So very different care. More similar, I think, to an OB in terms of like quick. Do you have any questions? Let's check the heart rate. Out. So that part felt similar to an OB. What did feel different though is they were more open to unmedicated birth, whereas I think some OBs have never even experienced an unmedicated birth or don't have training in it. They're thankfully trained for like what can go wrong and they're excellent surgeons and triage. So my intention was to have an unmedicated birth. So I was like, I want midwife. I had a birth doula. I was basically training to have an unmedicated birth. Some people are like, why the heck are you electing to do an unmedicated birth? I was like, I don't know. It just is something I want. Mm. And my mom birthed my sister and I without medication. Maybe it's that. I'm a yogini. Like I was just kind of curious about what is all the fuss about birth? Like, why is it such a thing? I wanted to feel it and experience it. So for whatever reason, that was my preference. And I did the Kundalini yoga, did a lot of Hatha yoga too, took all the classes, just was like really in the mindset, almost like you would for a marathon. So basically, my daughter was supposed to be, the due date, or as Kefri called it, the guest date was December 16th, 2016. That date came and went. I think after she was like a week late, it was December 23rd. It was a Friday. And the midwife that checked me at the appointment said, we want to induce you. And I said, no, thank you. I'm going to try some like natural things this weekend. And
did she say why she wanted to induce?
I think because it was
the holiday.
It was probably the holiday. And because I was 41 weeks, I think because I was 35 at the time. So I was like a, geriatric pregnancy or whatever, advanced maternal age. And so I think the fear was like the placenta could deteriorate or I don't know exactly. So they wanted to induce,
and everything was looking normal and healthy at your visit.
I think so. Yeah. I think everything was fine. The fluids were good, everything. Mm-hmm. So I was just like, I want to wait. So they were like, okay, well, let's schedule an induction on Monday, the 26th, if you don't go into labor sooner. And I was like, okay, fine. We'll like reassess on Monday. So that Friday and Saturday, I got acupuncture. She did these like points to get things going. My husband and I took a long walk. We had sex. I'll just say that because that's supposed to get things going. That was like,
you do all the things.
Interesting, you know?
Yeah.
And then on Christmas Day, I went into labor. At first, it was like early labor. I reached out to my midwife and the midwife on call and my doula, and they were like, you know, it was my first birth and everything. They were like, okay, you're in labor. Just like, you know, they didn't think it was like imminent. But my daughter decided to like come faster than everyone thought. So she was like kind of making us wait for a long time. But then when she was ready to come, she was ready to come. And that's like true to her temperament, which, you know, they say as they come in the world is who they are. I was in early labor from like 3 p.m. to like 9 p.m. It was like pretty mellow, just felt like period cramps and kind of manageable. And then I think at 9 p.m. I started to go into active labor, but I was able to kind of like manage it. And then I remember at 11 p.m. it was like no joke. Like people are like, you'll know when you're in labor. Like it was on. I was not able to lay down anymore. I was just like moving around. And like, speaking of husbands being involved, my husband was actually excellent at the hip compressions.
Oh.
And people talk about back labor a lot, but I felt it in my hips a lot. I'd always be like, hips, like that. And I was on all fours a lot. That just like felt the best. I don't know how like graphic you want me to get, but it was like I was coming out of both ends. Like,
oh yeah.
You know, it was just
making
like,
space for baby.
Yes. It was just very intense. And then Kefri came here after my husband Howard was helping for several hours and he was probably exhausted. So she took over and she was like amazing and was just like, had me do different things. Like, okay, sit on the toilet for a while. Okay, let's walk for a little while. And then I reached a point where I was like, I'm ready to go to the hospital. They were like, okay. And then I got all dressed, got all my stuff together. And then I was like standing over there in my house. My water breaks.
Oh, wow.
And it just like covers everything that I had just put on. So I had to change my clothes and then shuffled out of the house. My husband's like flying to UCLA. I'm in the back wailing. I don't know if I was in transition or what, but it was like, it was an intense part of the birth. Let me tell you.
So you were feeling an urge to push.
No. Oh, sorry. So it wasn't transition. It was just intense labor.
Yeah,
I don't remember the
really,
names of it.
really active labor.
Really, really active labor. It was just like so intense.
Yeah.
So we get to UCLA and it's like Christmas night at like probably 4 a.m. It was like dead. Janitor was there. And I'm dropping to my knees I don't even know how long. I had no concept of time. Frequently dropping to my knees, wailing, having contractions. We get up into labor and delivery and they're like, this girl's going to have her baby soon. And so they had to like kick some poor girl out of a room that was like in early labor. And they were trying to like do all the things to like monitor me. And I was like not being very cooperative. Because
you were in labor.
I was in labor.
And you didn't want anyone touching you.
No. I was feeling it in a very primal state. And I remember like, it's so funny, like prior to my being in labor, I remember asking my friend, like, what should I wear at my birth?
Oh, yeah.
You know, and she was kind of like, oh, honey, you know.
You're not going to be wearing anything, or you're not going to care what you're wearing.
And I think I just was like, they had like a hospital gown on me, and I just like threw it off. I was like, I'm going to be naked. Like, I don't even care. Like,
you reached that point.
Yeah. No inhibitions, no, you know, just definitely right brain primal state. So anyways, the next thing I knew, it was like time to push. And that was a very interesting sensation. I was just like, I don't know what to do. Like, it just felt like it was a really crazy sensation. And then the pushing phase was really quick. My daughter came out after 5 minutes of pushing. It was like really quick.
Oh my gosh.
I know. And she was born at 6:07 a.m. on December 26th.
Wow.
Yes. So that chapter of the birth, it was like fast and furious and intense and lightning bolt. And that's my daughter in a nutshell. The last stage of birth is where things kind of went awry. And so when you're like, how was the experience? Basically, I remember reading about like the like delivering of the placenta phase. Mm-hmm. It just kind of seemed like a whatever, you know? Like I didn't really think much about it before I was in labor. But it was like taking long. It was taking a long time. And it was kind of like, oh, come on. Like I thought this was like quick, you know? Mm-hmm. This part is kind of like, it's not crystal clear in my memory anymore, but like from what I can gather, kind of the energy shifted in the room. Like things weren't copacetic anymore.
So you had her on you.
I had her on me.
And you could feel the energies starting to change a little bit around you.
Yeah, totally. And I kind of was just like, ugh, I just had this like unmedicated birth. I want to just like be done and like have my baby and enjoy it. I'd been kind of promised that like
The golden hour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You get the golden hour and you get
Yeah.
if you can just kind of get through these hurdles, then you can just like enjoy it and get all the good chemicals and hormones from like, a natural birth. But like, unfortunately, I didn't get that. I feel, I'm not going to cry right now, but there was like grief around that of like not getting that, having that disappointment,
huge.
right?
That's huge. Yeah.
And so instead what happened, and just before I share this, I just want to give a disclaimer if anyone's listening, like it is kind of intense, so just trigger warning. But like I ended up hemorrhaging and I lost like double the amount of blood that you're supposed to lose for a vaginal birth. And as a doula, like you do lose a lot of blood. It was far more than I should have lost.
And the placenta wasn't coming out.
And it finally came out. And then also my daughter was like small, and she was 10 days late, but she was like 5 pounds, 9 ounces.
Oh, she was little.
Yeah, she was really little. And my placenta was small and the cord was short. In hindsight, there was like maybe some like growth restriction going on that like we weren't aware of. She wasn't small enough to go to the NICU, the neonatal intensive care unit.
Yep.
But she was still small. It was kind of like, oh, she's really small, So that was kind of surprising. I had elected to have this unmedicated birth, but then I elected to have different drugs to kind of help stop the bleeding. So it was like, there was where I didn't get like that high and that triumphant, like, wow, I did it, So it was like, I had to get different drugs to help stop and have uterus clamp down. And I'm fine. I'm okay. They got the placenta out. I eventually stopped bleeding. I did get a blood transfusion just to help make up for the blood loss. After I recovered from birth and was in recovery from like postpartum depression and anxiety, I felt really called to give back to new moms. I was like, wow, I'm a mental health practitioner and I have all the resources and all the knowledge, and this like still happened to me, Right after my birth, like a month before I gave birth, I was working at Promises Treatment Center. I used to work in drug and alcohol treatment centers. I loved the work there, and I loved being part of that, community. Speaking of going back to work, I just felt like it was too intense of a setting to go back to, especially after having such a tough like recovery and postpartum period. I let go of that job and I created Life After Birth in 2017, in the fall of 2017. So like just a little under a year before my daughter Bijou turned 1.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Wow.
And I just really wanted to create what I didn't have. I had done some mommy and me groups after birth. I was a little underwhelmed and kind of just looking for more depth and more focus on the mom and her whole journey and having like more of like a mental health lens or focus. So I started my group and it's just grown from there the past like 6 years and really just shifted all my energy and focus into learning as much as I can about new motherhood and PMADs and supporting new parents. And I love what I do. And so I guess kind of going back to the beginning when we're talking about birth stories, even though there was a chapter of my birth that was not positive, all in all, my whole experience of like birth and postpartum was the reason and the impetus for creating my company now. So, I wouldn't have had it go any other way, because if I had had a different birth, I may have never had that seed for doing what I do now.
Thank you for sharing that, because I think this is so relatable to so many new moms who are struggling with identity, that are not sure they want to go back to what they did before they had their child, and feeling very lost and nervous and anxious and afraid and all the things. And I think there's a tendency in our culture to want to like share our birth stories and tie it up with a pretty bow, and isn't it perfect? And I don't know, life is not perfect.
Yeah.
Life is fucking messy and things are hard, and giving birth is hard. It's a challenging time.
Yeah.
And I just really admire you for being so open with sharing your personal experience.
Yeah.
And I know that people listening are going to be able to resonate with what you're saying. And I just so appreciate you and the work that you do. And thank you so much for being a safe space for people to process this huge transition.
Well, thank you. I think as a therapist, therapists can't experience every grief or hurt or, mental health issue in the whole psyche. But like, there's something about having gone through what I went through. It allows me access to empathy for this like exquisite transition that I wouldn't have had otherwise. So I think it's like part of the wounded healer archetype. I'm able to give back because like I've experienced, a tough point in my birth, and I've experienced a PMAD. And so it's like I can kind of get in there with them, and offer hope to like get out,
Yeah. So really, you're a birth worker too.
I guess so. Yeah.
Thank you again.
Yes. Thanks for having me, Keely.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to share with friends and family and stay tuned for the next episode.